Hello everyone, I'm Soheil Shirangi, composer and music teacher. Over the past few years, I've shared performances of my works on my YouTube channel. But now I want to expand by adding training videos about composition and music in general. I tried to keep the content concise, practical, and as useful as possible while maintaining an academic approach. Please feel free if you have comment or question. Thank you. First of all, I should mention that this is a just summary and overview. If you want to learn more, you will need to check additional sources and analyze them, especially when it comes to books. There are many different books on harmony by great composers like Tchaikovsky, Korsakov, and others, but I recommend Walter Piston's book. It's very practical. After viewing this video, if you feel that is useful for you to support me, please subscribe my page and like it and recommend it to your friends. Let us start with first part of the harmony overview, intervals. Very brief and quick, I start with the consonant intervals, including all perfect intervals like unison, octave, perfect fourth and perfect fifth, major and minor third, and finally major and minor sixth. To avoid parallel fifths and octaves, try using country motion or static motion. As demonstrated in this example, both techniques are used to prevent parallel fifths. Now let's look at dissonant intervals, the major and minor second, the major and minor seventh, and tritone, which includes the augmented fourth and diminished fifth. Remember not to repeat dissonant intervals in another voice and ensure they are resolved quickly. Observe the example of augmented fourth and its resolution in G. And now I am going to start with the second part, chord progression. The classical harmony is based on the third intervals. As you know, harmony exercises typically consists of 4 parts. In the simplest way, I add the root note in the higher octave. Depending on the context, you can include other chord notes. But remember that harmony consistency should always be the priority. In addition to teriods, there are other type of chords, such as 7 chords. These are formed by adding a 7 interval to the root of the teriod. Now, let's explore another important concept in harmony, inversions. In teriod chords, there are 2 inversions. When the third teriod is in the bass, it's called the first inversion. As shown, the intervals are a 6th and a third. And to keep it simple, we denote 6. If the fifth is in the bass, is the second inversion, 6/4. In 7 chords, we have 3 inversions, and in the same way, you can see the 3 inversions of the 7 chords: root position, first inversion, second inversion, and finally third inversion. An essential tip for a smooth voice leading is to second intervals and avoid augmented and diminished intervals whenever possible. These intervals can create harsh jumps that disturb the flow of the music. If you must use augmented or diminished intervals, they should always be resolved, be more stable intervals, as demonstrated in this example. A. The fifth diminished resolved by the country motion. This country motion is famous by the Monteverdi's legacy. B. With using inspiration from the melodic progression in minor key, we resolved fourth diminished to A. And finally, C. You can feel perfectly the tonality absorption power. In order to resolve diminished intervals, as shown in example A, the notes move closer together. In contrast, for augmented intervals, the notes move farther apart, as seen in example B. In minor keys, the 7 note plays a significant role in strengthening the melody. You can see example of A minor here. The minor tonality needs to get process of harmonic and melodic movement. When we have a descending motion, it's natural for the interval to go from 7 to 6. Before I start the arpeggio section, I want to point out two general types of harmonic situations. Either they are neighbors or they are not. In this example, they are not neighbors. So the process will be simpler. We need to look for common notes and be careful to avoid parallel fifths and octaves. In this case, as you can see, there are two significant mistakes: parallel fifth and parallel octave with similar motion. And this is a perfect example. There are not any mistakes. We control parallel fifth and octaves with the country and static motion. Now look at this one. They are neighbors and there are two great mistakes: parallel fifth and octave with similar motion. And here there are two perfect examples. There are not any mistakes. I control parallel fifth and octave with country motion. Here is a short, perfect example of harmonic progression with no mistakes. All chords are in root position. Root positions are more challenging compared to situation when you use inversion. If you practice with example like this, it will help you a lot. Once you are comfortable, you will face and see how much easier it becomes to work with all type of inversions. However, be mindful of all inversions. For instance, the second inversions in triads, as you remember, contains a fourth. So, as I mentioned earlier, you can't repeat this interval and must resolve it really quickly. Here are several examples of broken chords or arpeggio. Take a look at this example by Mozart. Notice how these two chords plays a crucial role in the arpeggio process in his sonata in D major. In this other example by Mozart in C major, you can see the root and third are repeated in the left hand, while the right hand presents the melodic progression using both diatonic and chromatic passage. In the next part of this video, I'll explain much more about passing notes. The dominant 7 chord plays a key role in classical harmony. In this example from Mozart's sonata in C major, you can see how it resolved to G major after 2 measures. As I mentioned, the fourth interval should be avoided as much as possible, and if it happens, it shouldn't be repeated and must be resolved quickly. In this example, observe Mozart's approach to 6/4 chord and how he resolved it. The role of arpeggios in motifs and themes is really crucial. We can clearly see how great composers from Bach to others have utilized arpeggios. Here are 2 important examples by Bach. Now let's move on the third part, the change or transform notes and alien notes. As you know, every tonality, whether major or minor, consists of 7 main notes, but it can be limiting to stick to just these 7 notes, right? Many great composers throughout Western musical history have found ways to diversify and enrich their music. But how can we do this? We know the chromatic scale has 12 notes. So how can we use the 5 notes outside the 7 notes of the tonality? It's quite simple, by using change or transform notes and align notes. Change or transfer notes happen when we replace a note in our tonality with one from the chromatic scale using accidentals like sharp or flat. For example, F sharp is a transform note in C major. Alien notes are notes that belong to our tonality but are not part of the chord we are using currently. For example, the note G in F major chord, as you can see this example. In the next section, I will show you some useful examples from works by great classical composers. But remember, in classical harmony, we typically focus on triad and 7 chords. When we encounter new notes like 9, 11, and 13, we consider them as alien notes. Now I'm going to show you some practical examples. Changed or transfer notes. As you can see, by lowering the fifth of the minor chord, we can create a diminished chord. Another one is by raising the fifth of the major chord. We will have an augmented chord. In this example, as shown in example A, we transform the tonic chord in major key to a minor chord. And in example B, we transform the tonic chord in a minor key to a major chord. In the classical music, these kinds of transformation often occurs between the fourth chord and major and minor key. There are two models. A. Moll-Dur, a minor chord expressed in the major key. And B is Dur-Moll, a major chord expressed in the minor key. By lowering the bass of the second scale degree in a minor key, we create a major chord. If we use this major chord in the first inversion, it's called the Neapolitan 6. By lowering the bass of the second scale degree and using this chord as a first inversion, it becomes an augmented 6. We denote German augmented 6. The temporary or transforming dominant. By altering the third any minor chord, we can create a major chord, which then function as a temporary dominant or dominant of the dominant in relation to the lower fifth. Similarly, by changing both the third and the sixth, we can form the dominant of the dominant. In this one, to create a dominant of the dominant for the 7-degree chord in a major key, we use a diminished chords. This requires two transformations. To intensify the need for resolution in the first chord of a major key, we add a minor 7 to the root. There are 3 examples of the transforming notes in the 7 chords. Look at the other commonly used example of transforming 7 chords and other examples in works by masters. Now, I'd like to introduce several types of alien notes, suspension notes. When connecting one chord to another, if a note from the previous chord is held over, it becomes a suspension. This note is dissonant and must not be repeated. It should resolve to a consonant note. Although the resolve is usually downward, sometimes we encounter a major 7 interval, therefore, in which case the resolve can happen upward to the octave. Look at the 2 notable examples by Beethoven. The next one is the Appoggiatura. It's the alien notes that are not to be repeated and must be resolved and always happen in the strong beat. Here are 2 fitting examples by Mozart. Anticipation is another type of alien note. Occurs when a note or chord is played ahead of its time. The passing tone is the next alien note. It occurs between 2 notes of different chords, typically on a weak beat and in the same direction of movement. If the passing notes appears in the strong beats, is the passing emphasis. Sometimes the passing tones are moving in the higher octave with jumping movement. In classical music, some notes are connected by chromatic scale with consonance and dissonance intervals. We named it chromatic pass. Another one is neighbor tone. When we leave a note and return it immediately, we are using a neighbor tone. It usually occurs on weak beats. The next one is escape tone, when a note is separated from the chord structure by a step and then leaves by a leap in the opposite direction. The another one is pedal points, a note that remains unchanged with other chords. It's used in various forms and it's not necessary in bass and should happen in any voice. And finally, modulation, another important part of the harmony. What is the modulation? It's the process of moving from one tonality to another. There are three main ways to modulate, and sometimes these methods are combined. The first is diatonic modulation, where we use chords that common to both original and destination tonality. This is often done by starting with closely related modes, typically the neighbor's mode, which is the simplest and most widely used approach. Parallel tonality or tonalities a fifth higher or lower share, four common chords, first, third, fifth, and sixth. We can use one of these chords to transition into the tonic of the destination tonality. For example, here you can see modulating from C major to G major. The next one is the modulation to 2/5 higher or lower. Here we have more limited. It's because there are only two common chords of origin tonality, 3 and 5. In other words, we should look for the chords that don't have F sharp and C sharp. Now I'm going to introduce you 4 modulation upwards. Start by finding the minor chords in the original tonality, 2, 3, and 6. Each of these chords is the fourth of a minor tonality. For instance, in C major, D minor is the fourth of A minor. Now, for modulation to downwards, find major chords in original tonality, 1, 4, and finally 5. Then be aware these chords, each of them is fifth of tonality. For example, in C major, F major is fifth of B minor. Another one is chromatic modulation. In this type of modulation, we use a chromatic transformation of any note in the original tonality. This transform chord functions as the dominant of the destination tonality. After that, we may use the tonic of the destination tonality, but in inversions. After a few chords, we can return to the tonic of the destination tonality, gradually leading to the new tonality. You can also use transforming of dominant. And finally, the enharmonic modulation. If we can change the name of the notes in chords, we have new situation for solving. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this video, don't forget to share with your friends. Take care and I will catch you in the next one.